Yo, what's up? Dr. Swole here, MD Pro Physique Athlete. Today I'm going to be giving you the ultimate chest exercise tier list. This is going to be covering a bunch of common exercises, and today we're going to be slotting these exercises in the shirt popping all the way down to pancake tier list. I'll be explaining my reasoning for choosing these exercises as we go along. The first exercise we're going to be covering today is going to be push-ups, and I'm putting push-ups into the decent tier list. This is probably going to cause some outrage for a lot of you calisthenics guys out there, and push-ups are great biomechanically for the pecs, but the problem is in their ability for overload. You want to look at an exercise's overload ceiling, which is how heavy you're able to go in that exercise if you were to get really strong, and push-ups are going to be difficult to really load heavily. Also, you look at an exercise's micro-loadability. That is, how well are you able to add small, precise increments of weight? So, because of these reasons of the progressive overload factors, push-ups aren't going to be the greatest. Next, we have dumbbell flies, and these are going to go into the excellent tier. These are a great exercise. One of the key things about dumbbell flies is that they train your pecs in the bottom of the range of motion. There's more and more research coming out now showing that there's an advantage for hypertrophy in training your muscle in its lengthened state, and gravity makes this movement the most difficult at the bottom stretched position. Next up, we have the classic barbell bench press, and this is going right into the shirt popping tier. Bench presses are amazing for the chest. First off, and probably one of the biggest advantages, is its massive capacity for overload. You're able to go heavier on the bench press than any other exercise on this list. So no matter how strong you get, you're still going to be able to progress. Also, the pecs do really well with heavy loading, so they actually are particularly well suited for heavy lifts like the bench press. Next up here, we've got the ring push-up. Ring push-ups are going to go into the mediocre tier. Again, the push-up is a decent biomechanical movement, but you suffer the issues of overload. And particularly when you're using rings, you have this element of instability that makes it harder to overload heavily. Next up here, we've got the anti-gravity press. This is basically any type of movement where you're moving parallel to the floor. These fall right down into the pancake tier. You're really doing nothing for your pecs if you're not moving against gravity. So this will apply to any free weight push where you're not actually moving against gravity. You'll see people have all sorts of funny movement planes. Next up is a popular one, and that is the cable fly. This one is going to go into the decent tier. Cable flies do target your pecs, but the issue is in the instability factor. Since your body isn't locked in place, you have that extra degree of freedom, and you also get some instability from the cables. So these are my favorite type of flies. Next up is a big hitter, and that is the dip and the weighted dip. You might hear me talk about the disadvantages of calisthenics in that you're not able to load heavily, but dips are an exception to this. You are able to load yourself using a dips belt and strapping plates to yourself, so you can actually go really heavy. This combines that biomechanical favorability of that very natural dips motion, plus you get the ability to load heavily. So weighted dips are going to be a top pick for chest hypertrophy. Next up, we have the medicine ball push-up, and this goes right into the pancake tier. I'm really not a big fan of instability type training for hypertrophy. You're just not able to load it very heavily. You really want to see yourself as an athlete if you're a bodybuilder and you actually want to get strong. Next up is a bench press accessory movement, and that is the floor press. Floor presses are going to go into the decent tier. The problem with floor presses is that you're losing out on range of motion. Since you have the ground beneath you, this will stop the range of motion of your arms as they go down. They still can be useful as an accessory movement, and they actually hit the triceps to a very high degree. Since they really overload the lockout position, I will often use these as a main triceps builder. Next up here, we have the machine fly. Machine flies are going to go into the excellent tier. Machine flies have the advantage of you being able to really lock into the movement and trash your pecs. This makes them useful for later in the workout or as a lower priority exercise in your program. I personally like the machines that actually put your upper arm on the pad because this actually takes your biceps more out of the movement. Next up here, we have banded push-ups. These are going to go into the mediocre tier. Bands can be a way to add some resistance if you have nothing else, but the problem is that the tension happens at the top of the movement rather than at the bottom. And as we said earlier, you really want to be focusing on training the muscle in that lengthened position. Next up here, we have the plate press. Plate presses are not a good movement. I'm putting them in the pancake tier. People say that they're getting a good workout for their pecs because they feel that squeeze when they're actually holding a plate together or something like that. But that isometric squeezing motion really isn't doing much for your pecs. you really want to be getting that heavy overloaded stretch. So don't start thinking that isometric squeeze is going to build you that massive chest. Next up here, we have close grip bench press, and this is going into the decent tier. You'll see me using close grip bench a lot. These are an awesome exercise, but they do favor the triceps more. This is just because you're not putting the pecs under as much of a stretch when your arms are in close. That being said, they're still great from an overload standpoint and do target your pecs to some degree. Next up here, we have the alternating bench press, and this will go into any type of alternating press. I'm putting this into the mediocre tier. You're going to see people doing funny variations and alternating movements all the time, but I really don't think these are ideal for hypertrophy, largely because of that instability factor. As soon as you make a press unilateral, you're really sacrificing a lot of strength and stability, and I'd prefer you for the most part to go bilateral and heavier. Next up here, we have the incline dumbbell bench press. This is going into the shirt popping tier. Dumbbell bench press movements are great because you get that heavy overloaded stretch, and you also have the ability to go even lower in the stretch than a barbell bench press, so you can potentially get more range of motion. The incline bench press is going to be one of your best options out there for building your upper pecs. Moving on, we've got the decline push-up. This is going to go into the mediocre tier. The idea behind wider grip movements is that you're going to target your pecs a little bit more, but the problem here is that you're sacrificing range of motion. So this ends up downgrading these from regular push-ups. Next up here, we have the upper chest fly. These are going to go into the decent tier, and I actually think these are underrated. A lot of guys are lacking their upper pecs, so they're really trying to build them. And this is going to be the variation that you'll want to use. If you're trying to target your upper pecs with a fly, you want to fly in an upward motion because this will line up with the pec fibers in your clavicular head. I actually think more guys should be using these. Okay, next up here is going to be the converging machine bench press. This goes into the excellent tier. Machine bench presses can be useful because you can really push hard. You want to make sure that you get a converging machine. That is, your hands end up closer at the top of the movement than they did at the start. The pecs serve to bring your arms into the midline of the body, so a converging machine press will take advantage of that. When choosing a machine bench press, you want to make sure you get one that allows you to get a stretch at the bottom of the movement. Next up here, we've got the wall push-up. This is a joke and going straight into the pancake tier. Again, the issue here is gravity. You really aren't challenging your pecs to any high degree if your force plane is perpendicular to gravity. We're not going to be spending too much time talking about those. Next up, we have the wide grip barbell bench press, and this goes into the shirt popping tier. These are going to be another awesome movement for the pecs. With the wider grip, again, you're going to target your pecs even a little bit more. You will trade off some range of motion for this. What I'd recommend is finding your favorite grip width for bench press, but occasionally, if you need variation, you can try different grip widths. This can be a nice way to mix things up and bring in some novelty into your programming. Next up here is another machine fly. This is the one where you're holding onto the handles with your hands. This goes into the excellent tier. This is going to be pretty similar to the other machine fly we talked about. Just make sure you set up the machine so that you're not sacrificing any range of motion at the bottom of the movement and you're getting a good stretch. Next up here, we have the Smith machine bench press. This is going into the decent tier. Smith machines are really popular and they do have some application, but the issue with them is that you have this locked in plane of range of motion. This means that you don't have as much control over where the bar goes, so it won't be as natural of a movement. On the other hand, since you have the safety of the machine there, you are able to push closer to failure. Next up, we have the decline push-up, and this is going into the decent tier. This ranks the same as standard push-ups. With the decline, you're able to target your upper pecs a little bit more, but again, these suffer in terms of overloadability. Moving on here, next we have the reverse grip bench press. This goes way down into the mediocre tier. The reverse grip is just an awkward setup for a bench press, and because of this, you're not going to be able to go as heavy on it. Okay, next up we have the guillotine press. This is going into the decent tier. The idea here is that you're flaring your elbows way to the side so that you can get an even deeper range of motion. These might be okay for lightweights, but do put your shoulders in a precarious position if you want to go heavy. So they aren't going to be my favorite. Incline machine bench press is next, and this is going into the excellent tier. Again, with these, you want to make sure you choose a converging machine that puts your hands closer at the top of the movement and allows you to take advantage of that adduction part of the range of motion for your pecs. When it comes to machines, you really want to be choosing something that fits your body well. So try the different options at your gym if you have them and see what feels good. Next up here, we have the Swiss barbell bench press. This is going into the shirt popping tier. Most of these heavy barbell pressing movements are going to rank highly, and changing the grip angle into the neutral grip is still a very strong position for you. So this can be a great option for another pressing exercise if you have the Swiss barbell at your gym. Next up here, we have the feet up bench press. This is going to apply to a few different variations, but basically you don't have your feet on the ground. These are going into the decent tier, and I will say that for very advanced athletes who know what they're doing, there are some special applications for this, but for most people, I don't consider them to be that great because you're sacrificing that stability. You really want a good strong base of position to focus on pushing through your pecs. And the more points of instability you have to disperse that force means the less amount of overload you'll be able to put on your pecs. Going on, we have the dumbbell bench press, and this is going to go right into the shirt popping tier. Dumbbell bench presses are going to be right up there with barbell bench presses. You have lots of opportunity for overload, and you can even get a bigger stretch in if you have that range of motion. One issue with dumbbell bench presses is that you're going to have difficulty making small micro overloading adjustments. So once you get into the higher dumbbell ranges like 100 pounds plus, your gym probably isn't going to have increments of 2.5 pounds, for example. But this isn't going to be that big of an issue, so awesome exercise. Next up, we have the single arm push-up. This is going into the decent tier here. Single arm push-ups are going to be one of your better bets if you're stuck, say, in a hotel room with no weights available and you have trouble actually overloading regular push-ups. But again, you will suffer that ability in precisely overloading. Next, we have the cambered bar bench press. This goes right into that shirt popping tier. Cambered bars are great if you have them because they allow you to get a deeper range of motion at the bottom of the movement. You will sacrifice some load here because you are getting that greater range of motion, and the bottom part of the movement is the toughest part of the movement. But from a pure hypertrophy standpoint, this is going to be great. And for advanced athletes, you'll find that you really want to start looking for ways to overload your muscles even more without having to deal with really heavy weights. This is because really heavy weights come with high degrees of fatigue. And when you're generating so much fatigue at a high level, this will become limiting from a hypertrophy standpoint. So a great tool in your toolbox if you have it available. Okay, next we have the Bosu ball bench press, and this goes into the pancake tier. I'm really not a fan of Bosu ball or exercise ball training. That instability really isn't going to benefit you. People argue that they're building core strength for functionality for their sport, but really if you actually want to build that core strength, you want to train it in a specific way, and the instability from a Bosu ball isn't really going to translate. Next up, we have a non-converging bench press machine, and this is going to go into the decent tier. When you lose out on that converging aspect, you're giving up a significant part of the range of motion for your pecs. So this downgrades these from the other machine bench press that was converging, which we put into the excellent tier. Just keep in mind that not all exercises are made equal. Next up is the cable press. This goes into the mediocre tier. Yes, you can do a pressing movement when you're in the cable stack, but you're giving up a lot of stability here when you switch to a cable variation. Cables give you a lot of freedom of movement, which can be useful in certain scenarios, but when you're trying to adapt this into a heavy compound pressing movement, you're just giving up on a lot of potential overload here. So I would prefer a freeweight movement or a machine movement with a good locked in range of motion if you are going to go heavier. So for the most part, I do prefer free weight or good stable machines for compound movement training. Next up here is the bench cable fly. This is where you actually set up a bench in front of the cable stack so you can do flies from a seated position. I actually like the idea of these because you get that added stability of having a bench behind your back. But the problem here is that it takes so long to set this up, so I just don't think these are that practical for everyday type training. But if your gym isn't that busy, then you could try setting this up. Now keep in mind that you don't actually have to cross your arms over in these movements, which you'll see people doing a lot. Bring your arms close enough to touch is enough. Okay, this next one is going to cover a bunch of movements that are pet peeves of mine, but basically all those push-up type movements where you're trying to glide around, go all around the world, or move from one side to the other, and basically anything else that looks like a yoga movement. The problem with these is multiple fold. First of all, you're not able to progressively overload heavy because the movement is so dynamic. Second, you're not really targeting your pecs that well because you're not overloading consistently in a force vector that's going to challenge your pecs. And finally, you have troubles with standardization. When you have all of these funny movements, it gets difficult to actually make it exactly the same each time, so you're not going to be able to consistently progress. Next up here, we got the dumbbell pullover. Some people will say that this can be a chest exercise. I typically consider this more of a lat exercise. Since your arms are together the whole time, you're not getting that adduction range of motion in the horizontal plane to your body. I also wanted to put this landmine chest press on the list. This is going straight down into the pancake tier. These are more of a front delt exercise than a chest exercise. You're not actually getting that adduction of the arms, and when you're using that landmine attachment, you're not able to go that heavy. It's an awkward position and you just aren't very stable. Now that you've seen this list, is there anything that you disagree with? Let me know in the comments below. If you want to learn more about how to blow up your chest, check out this video where I give you a complete guide to building your pecs. This is going to be a science-based approach that's really going to help you optimize your training. Make sure you subscribe to the channel to transform your body and transform your life, and we'll see you next time.